Oh, okay.
Out of sight, out of mind.
I don't blame you.
That's not how it works.
Oh, no. Oh, I was gonna say, what's
Where did that come back?
and it's us.
That's up, stop, board.
Did you do the?
You know.
Huh?
It's talking back over the.
Oh, gotcha.
Hello, hello.
Good evening, sir.
Hey, how you doing?
All right, how
Good. She's cold. Hey,
are
you like, wait a minute, those
y'all?
those sticks is low. Sorry.
How do we get it up from there?
That's great. That's like watching Netflix today.
Oh, hey. Put it on, put it on, power. Miss Rita, did you remember? Remember when we went to the event? Meeting today?
Just use.
I wasn't, but I'm not sure. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, what is that? Is that a real?
I don't know.
Probably new, probably got that on the new one.
Oh.
That's how I got that. And I think that
Not much.
Oh, wake up,
Yeah,
wake
up. Maybe I should have brought a copy because it was water.
So I got this, and then the brick toilet.
Just give me
Energy.
I was like,
So kind of
okay,
shit.
maybe-
No, I didn't. I don't wanna know about that girl. That's what it is. Yeah, I know.
He's going to
Yeah, but,
his own board meeting tonight.
it's been a long one.
So, and that starts
Yeah,
at
I'm not sure how I heard it.
7.
That's
Oh,
all.
yeah, yeah, stuff in the-
Stuff in the-
Stuff in the-
For what?
You know, I guess stuff in the-
Oh, no.
And I. When he said it was a time, but. Yeah. I was blessed, yeah. Yes.
Well.
What?
So we can go ahead and get our study session going. So I will go ahead and call this meeting to order at 6:03 p.m. If we could all stand for the pledge of allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. City Clerk Domingo, please take roll call, please.
Councilmember Williams,
Present.
Reed, Jackson,
Here.
Lawler,
Here.
Lanu,
Here.
Williamson, and Mayor Snyder.
Here. So for our study session, we are getting information on the recreational marijuana sales. So we do have presenters, and we all had the link to view the YouTube seminar. So hopefully we all had a chance to view that, so we have appropriate questions to be asked this evening. So we can go ahead and turn this over, and I'm not sure who we have.
So, just so the council's aware, so what your gentleman that's gonna be writing with some additional information tonight is a colleague of mine. His name is Nick Curcio. He's an attorney in the west side of the state here. And I will turn it over to him for his PowerPoint presentation.
Hi. So can everybody hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, great. So I'm going to do a share screen so you guys hopefully can see the PowerPoint where you are. And let me know. Actually, that's not going to work. Hold on just a second.
Or you might have.
You might have
Huh?
You might have to
permission to
access.
share the screen.
Down at the bottom.
It says host disabled.
Share, yeah,
Oh, yep.
yeah, there you go.
Should be good, right?
Yep.
Okay. And then. Okay, can everybody see the first slide?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So tonight's presentation is specifically about adult use marijuana retailers. My understanding is that the city of Albion has for some time allowed first marijuana, medical marijuana facilities, and then later recreational adult use facilities under the MRTMA, but currently excludes the use of commercial retailer. And this presentation is going to focus specifically on that use, how it differs a little bit from provisioning centers, and some other relevant information that the council might want to consider in determining whether or not to amend your ordinances to allow them. So this presentation, unlike a lot that I typically do on marijuana topics, is going to assume kind of basic knowledge of the MMM-FLA, the medical marijuana statute, and also some knowledge of the MRTMA, which seems appropriate because I know the city's already gone through this process and adopted ordinances allowing many of the other businesses. So you're probably fairly well versed in some of the basics of these statutes. So part one, it's going to focus on potential benefits of allowing adult use retailers in the city. So proponents of these types of businesses might point out the excise tax sharing that's allowed under the statute. Previously, I don't know if this was the case when the city opted into medical marijuana, but before recreational marijuana came online in Michigan, medical marijuana purchases were charged an excise tax at a rate of 3%. When the recreational statute was passed, that revenue sharing stream no longer exists. So medical marijuana patients no longer pay any excise tax for purchases. The only excise tax that exists is on the recreational side, and it's a 10% excise tax, and that is paid to the state. But then there's a state revenue sharing scheme that's set up where parts of the revenue are distributed back to municipalities based on the number of retailers or micro businesses that are in the communities. So you don't get any revenue sharing for the businesses that you already have in the city of Albion. They're limited to kind of the sales type businesses, being retailers and micro businesses. And these payments were fairly substantial last year. Based on the revenue that was received, they kind of divided it by the total number of facilities that existed, and what it came out to be was approximately 28,000 per retailer was distributed back to municipalities. So if a retailer had, say if a municipality has 2 retailers, for example, they would get 2 of those payments for almost $60,000. And that's going to vary every year based on the revenues received from the excise tax. But projections kind of predict that it's likely to go up as opposed to go down. So that's a fairly significant consideration when municipalities are looking at this. Again, here's more information on the state excise tax. Proponents might also argue that especially when a community already has medical marijuana, it might be worth looking at the retail facilities in addition to the provisioning centers, because data seems to indicate that the recreational side is going to continue to increase as the medical side may possibly shrink from competition on the recreational side. So this chart shows sales in the period starting January 2020 and going through the end of January 2021. And you can see a pretty significant spike in sales on the recreational side with kind of slow declines on the medical side. And some predict that if those trends continue, then facilities that only have a medical marijuana provisioning center license may struggle to compete with businesses in other communities that have the retailer license in addition to the medical marijuana license. And from a community standpoint, an argument proponents might make would be that thriving businesses are often better maintained, better managed, et cetera, as compared to struggling businesses. So one, I guess, advantage of looking at allowing retailers is that marijuana businesses in general have been very litigious in the past few years. There's been a high volume of lawsuits against municipalities relating to either the denial of licenses or the enactment of schemes that preclude certain types of businesses and things like that. High volume of lawsuits stems from a number of factors. One that's often cited is that the statute, the MRTMA, has quite a few ambiguities, probably due to the fact that it was enacted through a ballot initiative as opposed to an ordinary legislative bill that would have gone through vetting through committees and staff that review things like that. Didn't have the benefit of that process, and I think as a result, it's not quite as well written as a lot of other statutes in Michigan law. And then also just the potential revenue associated with licenses and lost revenue from the inability to get a license makes the financial incentive of filing lawsuits kind of worthwhile, I guess, to the disappointed applicants in these cases. Some municipalities that allow some marijuana businesses but exclude others have become targets for litigation in some parts of the state, and those risks can be mitigated by allowing more businesses potentially. So as I believe the council is aware, there is a argument that's being put forth by the cannabis industry in a number of communities, which argues that if a municipality allows provisioning centers, it cannot prohibit adult use retailers. This argument is based on a provision in the MRTMA that states that, I'll quote from it shortly, municipality cannot prohibit a marijuana retailer from operating at a location shared with a medical marijuana facility operating pursuant to the MMFLA. So the prevailing, I think, interpretation among municipal attorneys, and myself included, is that this provision simply means that when a municipality allows provisioning centers and retailers, it has to allow them to co-locate. So you could, if you were to allow retailers, you couldn't prohibit a retailer and a provisioning center from operating in the same building. But some cannabis attorneys are arguing that it actually means that if you allow provisioning centers, you have to allow retailers to operate in that building. You can't opt out of retailers altogether. I don't think that's persuasive. I think that this language looks to me like it was targeted at the co-location issue, and there are a number of other arguments that I think municipalities look at other parts of the statute as a whole and just say it doesn't make sense for it to mean what the cannabis bar is pushing. But it is an open question. I think lawsuits are probably likely on this issue, although I'm not aware of any currently pending ones. I am aware of this argument being asserted in a number of places throughout the state. Another factor to consider is that communities that do not and that have not opted in, or that have opted in to only a limited set of businesses have sometimes been target of ballot initiatives. There's a process under the MRTMA for citizens to initiate ordinances to either completely prohibit marijuana, and there have been some ballot initiatives to that effect, or to attempt to expand the number of licenses available by providing a higher number than what's otherwise provided by the ordinance adopted by the legislative body. So there have been ballot initiatives across the state. Typically, I find they're not written in a manner that's favorable to the municipality. They often have kind of merit-based, subjective schemes proposed for the granting of licenses, and things that may potentially get a municipality into some trouble if they are enacted. So I tend to recommend that if there's a strong push ballot initiative wise, the legislative body should look at adopting their own ordinance before that can occur potentially. So that's something to consider. And in general, although there's obviously differences from community to community, but kind of pro marijuana ballot initiatives, ones that expand the number of licenses as opposed to reduce the number of licenses available, have been fairly successful at the ballot box in the last couple of election cycles. There's obviously some exceptions to that, but that's been kind of the general rule. Part two is concerns associated with adult use retailers. So an overview of some potential concerns. The state licensing scheme doesn't expressly it doesn't include express consideration of integrity or moral character of the applicant, as it used to under the MMFLA. There's security concerns associated with high cash businesses. Only state regulators and not municipalities can revoke or suspend state operating licenses based on an applicant's misconduct or an operator's misconduct. And finally, the MRTMA requires a competitive process for licensing that has generated significant litigation. So I'll go through each of these individually. When the medical marijuana statute was enacted in 2016, it required state regulators expressly. There was express provision in the statute that required consideration of an applicant's integrity, moral character, and reputation. And there were a number of licenses denied on this basis for prior convictions or other evidence of relating to the character of the applicant. The MRTMA does not include a similar criterion, which when communities were kind of initially looking at this in 2018, that raised some concerns that unscrupulous individuals might be more likely to apply and to obtain adult use licenses under this scheme than medical marijuana licenses under the prior statute. Notably, this difference has actually now been removed as of just a few months ago. There's new legislation that eliminates the integrity, moral character, and reputation consideration from the medical side. So they're now actually even in this regard, but this is different than how the medical side is operated historically. So that's one thing to note about the retailers. Another concern that I've heard often in communities that have been studying this issue, and this relates just as much to provisioning centers as to adult use retailers is that these tend to be high cash businesses for the most part. And I think this is changing some on the banking side, but these businesses have not had ready access to the ordinary banking services. Some within the last few years, I believe, have started using local credit unions. Some were willing to accept accounts with marijuana businesses. And now, just within the last year or so, I understand some regular banks have started offering services. I don't know how broadly that is at this point. There's a pretty large number of regulatory hurdles to them being able to do that, but it's becoming increasingly common. So while banking seems to be getting more and more common, as of now, neither Visa nor MasterCard accept transactions from marijuana businesses, which means that the majority of sales taking place are going to be taking place in cash, with meaning high cash volumes on hand, at least at the end of any business day. And if banking is not readily available, possibly building up day after day. So that's a concern from a security perspective relating to these businesses. In terms of the license suspension process, there is a mechanism in the statute and in the rules promulgated by the state for municipalities to report criminal activity or any other violations of local ordinances and request that a marijuana license be revoked. But that request is merely a request. The state ultimately makes a determination on that. I have heard incidentally that they don't always revoke a license just because a municipality requests it. So it's if you were to get into a situation where you really wanted a business to be punished at the state level or possibly to even be shut down at the state level, that would be the state's decision. And the municipality would not have the final say in that regard. And finally, the competitive process requirement. This has been a major source of litigation throughout the state. Unlike the medical statute, the recreational statute says that if a municipality limits the number of licenses, it has to allocate the licenses through a competitive process intended to select applicants who are best suited to operate in compliance with the act. This provision is thought to prohibit neutral selection systems like lottery and first come, first serve that are pretty commonly used for medical marijuana license issuance. And instead, when this requirement applies, it essentially requires communities to implement subjective scoring system schemes where you're ranking applicants based on a variety of factors. That's disappointing. The applicants who don't ultimately get a license through that process have been very likely to sue the municipality, alleging bias in the scoring system or errors in computing the score, or questioning the legality of various factors in the scoring system that the municipality has devised. There's been a number of different theories that these lawsuits have been brought under. And in my view, and I believe the city has kind of already gone this route in some of the licensing systems that it has in place, the best way to avoid this potential liability is to create a process that only limits the number of businesses through zoning regulation, as opposed to putting numerical caps on the number of businesses. So that's another thing to think about. So final thoughts on this. Proponents may argue that retailers are very closely resemble provisioning centers, and the public is unlikely to even notice if retailers are allowed, and if provisioning centers are allowed to obtain the retailer license in addition to the license they already have. That being said, there are some regulatory differences between the two types of businesses that cities should consider, as kind of outlined in this presentation. And finally, it's worth noting that if a business holds both a provisioning center and a retailer license, it has to keep its medical inventory separate from its adult use inventory. In practice, that typically means kind of two purchasing counters, one that's medical marijuana and excise taxes not charged on it, and the other counter being recreational that's gone through the recreational supply chain, and the 10% excise tax would be charged on that portion of the sales. They typically have separate registers to process the different types of transactions. So on the ground, that's what that would would probably look like in a business that held both licenses. So with that, I will answer any questions that the council might have.
Do we have any questions for our presenter? Or for our own attorney? Want to do an add anything?
No, I think Mr. Curcio did a great job. I'm happy to answer questions at a, whether you have them now or at a future date. I think at some point in the future, we'll probably schedule another closed session to review some legal materials in a closed session to have another discussion on this. But Mr. Curcio covered several of the things that the city's already done. The competitive process that he mentioned, while normally that would apply, we operate under a zoning-based system currently, so that won't apply to us. And previously, there used to be a state regulation that in order to even have an adult use license, you also had to have a medical license, which is how we were able to get away with the previous system that we had. But the state has since eliminated that, which is another reason why we've switched. But I think Mr. Curcio will agree with me. It is a forever evolving industry and a all around litigious industry. So, and unfortunately, as it relates to the MRTMA, there's not much, if any, appellate case law giving guidance on the vast ambiguities that exist in that statute. So.
I got a question.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Curcio,
Yes.
have you witnessed any municipalities in Michigan where they use an equity program? Kind of like what they do in California?
So there is a social equity provision in the MRTMA. It only pertains directly to the state's licensing program. So there's several categories of groups indicated for the equity program. I believe some are based on where the applicant resides. If it's in a community that has been historically adversely affected by the overregulation or regulation of marijuana, then I think there's a list of communities, and I believe the city of Albion is on that list, as Mr. Harkness told me prior to this meeting. Then they would be eligible for fee discounting. Some other categories I think include prior convictions for minor marijuana offenses. If the applicant has been convicted for a kind of a minor possession charge or something to that effect prior to the legalization of marijuana, they would be entitled to a discounting of the licensing fees, which can be quite substantial at the state level. That's essentially how the states operate. The social equity program works, from my understanding. I have seen some communities that have kind of done a similar thing at the local level. The city of Grand Rapids ordinarily charges a licensing fee locally, and the statute, I believe, allows you to charge a fee up to $5,000. I know that's true on the medical side. I believe that's true on the recreational side as well. And they have kind of adopted similar criteria to the state, and will discount that fee if the applicant meets similar thresholds to the ones I described at the state level. That's the only social equities type of scheme I've seen in a city, but I think that is something that could potentially be an option.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Yvonne.
I just have a question on I know the state doesn't require you to have the medical and the recreational licenses. Can we do that through ordinance to require them to have both?
I'll defer to your city attorney on that question. I would say in general, the state's licensing scheme kind of trumps anything locally. And with respect to licensing, I have not seen any communities that have tried to do that. I do think there are some possible preemption issues that would relate to that.
I can tell you, I know that there are at least a handful of communities that have done that. I'm not aware of any litigation on that, but that's not to say that it won't be forthcoming at some point. But I'm aware of some communities that have that currently in place that say that you have to have both as a condition to obtain a adult use license.
I could see it being a factor in a competitive process, but with Albion not doing a competitive process, I think that could potentially make it more challenging to implement a regulation like that. But I wouldn't say definitively that it can't be done. But that would be something to look at.
Right, and then the license fee right now is currently $5,000. Is there anything built into the state statute to increase that? Because that's been the same 5,000 since it started.
It's a hard cap written in the
It's a hard
statute.
cap.
The hard cap, yes.
And then the excise tax, I know it was $28,000 last year, and that goes to the city and to the county. They each get the 28,000.
That is a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I know it goes to the city. I don't know what the county's share is.
There's different percentages as you, so currently the way that they're, and I'm speaking very generally here. So for the first couple of years, there's I believe it's $20 million, well, of the 10%, $20 million off the top goes for research for, I think, veteran research. And then there's percentages that go down to the state and to schools and to local municipalities in the county. And I would have to check the percentage for counties, but for sure, there's 10% that comes to there's the 28,000 was the municipal allocation statewide for each facility.
Thank you.
So after reviewing the video, it seemed like we already have some of the safeguards in place that they were talking about, in regards to the overlay district, limiting the number of licenses. So I think we kind of did the good thing by not jumping in head first with the sales portion of it. But, like Attorney Harkness has said, it's ever evolving. So we don't know what potential litigious issues could arise. So I know this is something that we definitely still want to do our due diligence on before we move forward, if we move forward. But the other things that they spoke about, I'm sure that if we did decide to move forward, we could definitely include in the language of an ordinance. The only question that I had, and I know you spoke upon having something come up on the ballot, but would that be like a statewide ballot issue? It wouldn't be a local issue, would
No,
it?
yeah, so
Yes.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
You can go ahead.
Okay, so, I mean, just like any other initiative for an or somebody, like under our city charter, somebody could do a ballot initiative to enact, say, a zoning ordinance, or repeal one of our criminal ordinances, or add, any other kind of regulation. So the MRTMA has a provision built in and to say that people can do a ballot initiative if a community has opted out to say, we want to opt in, or we want to modify the language of the existing ordinance. And just like any other ballot initiative, what the city can do is say, well, hey, within a certain amount of time, if they were to go and get the signatures and to address one or more things, we could say, well, we're gonna adopt a regulation and put in an ordinance that we're going to adopt it, and then what Nick was getting at is you generally have more control by doing the law yourself rather than something written by the citizens that, as you can see from other initiative laws, they don't generally address everything, and they leave a lot of holes and it becomes problematic to litigation. Usually how I see that addressed, because sometimes it comes out of the blue and you have to act quickly on them. A lot of times what I'll see is a community that is facing a ballot initiative, they'll adopt their own legislation, but they'll set the effective date out so that they've adopted it and they can avoid the ballot initiative, but it gives them time to A, adapt to what they're gonna need to do, and B, they can always amend it if they need to before its effective date. So some communities have seen those ballot initiatives. I know that some of them have seen it the other way. One of my other communities has a ballot initiative coming up in August where they want an affirmative vote to keep the township opted out. So it swings both ways,
Okay.
but it is possible to do it at a local level.
Okay, yeah, that was my other question about opting out for the retailers. So the city could, if they decided, if we had an ordinance in place to have that item to
Well, for
opt
this,
out of that.
so, I mean, what the city could do is you could do a ballot, a vote question to put it out to voters to say, do you want retail sales in the city or don't? So you could put that out there, you know, aside from the citizen initiating a ballot issue. And some communities have done that. Some of them it's because they can't, you know, you have sometimes divided township boards or divided city councils, and sometimes some of them will say, you know what, rather than hashing this out, let's just let the citizens decide. And it'll just be a yes or no on whether to have it, and then they adopt an ordinance that puts in the framework.
Shane, I know that, you know, you just got in, but if you've had the chance to review the videos and looked at the packet, do you have any questions for the attorney who's presenting right now?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think I just have a
Yes.
couple statements. I know, I believe Mr.
Curcio.
Did hit, so the city of Albion, we are a rural community. And under the former Mayor Atchison, there were a few different sessions held in their community where we did have state representatives come out and speak on what the equity program is. So I just wanted to put that back or bring that to all council's attention if you were not aware. And also at the last planning commission meeting, the planning commission, they have agreed to issue all proper notices to hold a public hearing on potentially expanding our current marijuana overlay district to include the entire encompass of the industrial park. This is per a recommendation of the LBDC board. So that is moving forward for an upcoming meeting. So that is on the planning commission's radar to look at potentially expanding our current overlay district.
Yes.
So to just expand on that just a little bit, City Manager Snyder, so the EDC board has recommended to the city, essentially to the planning commission, to expand the overlay district for recreational processing at the industrial park to include the entire industrial park.
Correct.
So currently what we have via city resolution or ordinance that we've done here, it's very restrictive. But
Yes.
the planning commission is going to hold a public hearing to hear what people and business owners would like to do in the industrial park, and then bring yet another recommendation back to council.
Yeah, so they just had an initial discussion, and please refer, please jump in if I'm missing anything. So they had the initial discussion on whether or not they are interested in doing this. They received a memo from the EDC director from prior discussion at the EDC board meeting, which they are in support of expanding the industrial park. Our current overlay district includes a few parcels within the industrial park, but not all of them. So this, by issuing the proper notices to all of the businesses and homeowners surrounding that area, this will then allow them to hold a public hearing and then take action on whether they would agree to expand it or not.
Yes, Councilman Levin.
How would this expansion impact our current ordinance, which limits the number of licenses to 5, which is the total number that we have?
That's not our current ordinance anymore. That ordinance was rescinded when we switched to the overlay districts.
Okay, okay. So there's no cap, there's no numerical cap, it's just the overlay district. That's the limitation.
There's no cap for adult use. There is still a cap for medical.
Okay.
And that cap is 20.
Councilman Williamson, you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to clarify process. So if they have a public hearing and then take action to want to expand the overlay, does that have to come to council, or is that something they can do? Just, it does have to come to
It will
council.
come to council for, they don't, essentially what, if they approve it or deny it, they would be essentially make a recommendation to council for final formal approval.
Because it's a zoning ordinance change,
Yeah.
is what it ultimately would be.
Yes, Councilman Williamson.
Thank you, Mayor Snyder. I'm curious with Director Earl being here. One of my concerns in all of these discussions is the many competing priorities that we have in our community. And I'm curious with regard to expanding the overlay district, for example, how that would impact your work flow and the work that you're juggling already.
Yeah, I don't want to give a short answer to a complicated question, but it really wouldn't complicate it any further. It would make things a lot easier in some ways. I've turned away a few people this year who've gotten pretty far into emailing back and forth with me to find out that the business that they're wanting to do isn't going to be allowed anymore, isn't going to be allowed on the parcel that they own anymore. They've been pretty frustrated with that, but understanding that that's where we've left it. I'm going to submit a more formal recommendation on paper, but an important thing to keep in mind is if you took action at tonight's meeting, all of you agreed that you wanted to have adult use sales. There isn't a spot for that to happen right now because of how the overlay district is. Our zoning ordinance does allow for provisioning centers and thereby retail in the M1 and M2, which are the two industrial districts we have. However, the industrial park is also managed by the Economic Development Corporation, and in their covenant, they don't allow, whether their covenant is their own little set of development guidelines for the industrial park. They don't allow for retail businesses in the industrial park. So even though our zoning ordinance says, yes, the EDC still has their jurisdiction over the industrial park, and they don't want kind of public facing businesses, they want manufacturing, production. Right now, also the commercial district, which is broadly the up by McDonald's, we'll say for simplicity, where Sunny's is located right now, that would allow for everything but growing, basically, so processing, transportation, and provisioning, except for the fact that our retail, or that our overlay district doesn't extend to that district. So unless I'm wrong, and I do see Colin has his hand up, I think even if you voted yes on adult use sales right now, there's still some things that have to happen before you can be able to have a retail store.
So, as it relates to the EDC regulation of the industrial park, and Mr. Curcio can correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a section of the MRTMA that basically says you can't prohibit, if you were to allow retail sales in the city of Albion, you cannot prohibit their co-location at a adult use grow. So the EDC would not be able to prohibit a retailer from operating at the same location at a grow because that's provided for by state law.
Yes, Councilwoman Williams.
So I'm hearing you that the adult use retail automatically gets to, from state law, be at the place where a grow is allowed. So that could currently happen because we have no facility?
No, you would have to, that's if you were to
If we
allow
allow
for
it,
retail
period.
sales,
Okay,
you would have to allow them to co-locate.
okay. And so with regard to that co-location, I was hearing you say that our industrial park does not allow for retail.
And what I'm saying is state law trumps that.
Yeah, okay.
The EDC's standards say no retail, but if we were to opt into adult use sales, that gets trumped, and any one of the growers currently in there for adult use growing could also have retail dispensary.
Thank you.
Councilman Williamson.
So I wanted to make sure I got everything about the different commissions straight, the boards and commissions, like in order, because this issue has gotten messy over the last year and a half. Because we had the recreational provisioning or recreational grow facility ordinance in place prior to 2021, and then in 2021, we said, well, we're gonna do 5, and then we got rid of that, and we said, you can only put it in this overlay, which essentially limited it to 5. And both the EDC board has all along been encouraging us to move towards recreational, not only grow, but also eventually sales. And then the planning commission, who actually approved the ordinance that we originally approved for the 20 licenses similar to the medical marijuana, that we then used emergency powers to go down to 5, and then because we were gonna have legal action, then had to move to this overlay district to avoid legal action. That same city planning commission that did all of that we kind of made a mess of, is now taking it to the public again for a hearing, to then come back to council to encourage us, if all goes the way it has gone in the past, both with the EDC board, the planning commission, the public hearings, the election for recreational marijuana, we know that the recommendation is probably going to be to have retail sales and or recreational processing.
What they're recommending is an expansion to overlay just for growing and processing.
Okay, so we're gonna at least do growing and processing. They're at least gonna be a recommended growing and processing. Okay, got it. So it's gonna come back again, and we're gonna have to talk about it again after multiple times of talking about it and probably making a mess of it. So this is pretty serious that they're gonna be bringing it back again with more public input, with more votes for the affirmative for growing and processing. And we are the only ones who are holding it up. We're the only body holding up growing and processing for adult use. So I just want to make sure I clarify that.
Correct, and that will more than likely take place at their March meeting, just due to the timing of getting the notices published and issued to all the businesses and homeowners within the area. After they gave that approval, it did not give us a month, like we have a few days to get all of that done. So we are making sure that we do our due diligence and make sure all of those notices are properly published and issued to all the parties involved.
I have another question. If we do another can you do 2 overlay districts?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm sorry, that wasn't really an attorney answer. I can draw that out, you know.
No, I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to put you on the spot, but Assistant City Manager Rich, you've kind of been in an interesting situation with dealing with marijuana as only as an elected official and then as a public administrator. Would you care to share a little bit about that with our council?
Sure. When I was in Charlotte, I was serving on city council, the same issue was brought to council. And at that time, being on council, and I'll be the first to admit it, I was an adamant no. We don't want this in our town. We don't want it. You know, I worked at the school system too, and I was very opposed to it, but I really didn't do a lot of research on it to see everything that I needed to see. When I went to White Cloud as a city manager up there, they already had marijuana. So there was already dispensaries, there was already grow facilities. And really, it was just part of the community. It didn't, I mean, I wasn't threatened by it. The business owners there were some of the best business owners that I dealt with in my time that I was there. I think when you're looking into this, maybe look at other communities that have it and see if they're having any issues or concerns, you know, with it, and try and be open-minded about what it's going to do for Albion as far as, you know, you already have facilities that are selling medical marijuana, so you're really not going to see a difference by putting the adult use, you know, in the stores. No one in the public is going to know really what they're selling in there. The facility's already there. But I would just encourage you to be open-minded about it and maybe talk to some other communities and, you know, see how it's working for them. But, you know, I've been on both sides of it, and, you know, I understand where you're where the decision that you have to make here. But just make sure you're thinking outside the box and that you're really looking at other, you know, communities and what's going on. And just be, you know, objective about it.
I was gonna ask the assistant city manager, during was White Cloud your last community, right? Okay, so back last March, when the state did their profit sharing because of the retail sales facilities, how much did your community receive?
We have a community up there of 1,383 people, and our city received $58,000 for the 2 facilities. One of our there was 3. One of them was not complete by September 30th, so we weren't able to get the excise tax. We were told at that time that they estimate the revenue sharing for this coming year to be $20,000 because there's more facilities that are out there.
Oh,
So, two things. One, Mr. Curcio has a 7 PM meeting. And so I wanted to say, if anybody else has questions for him, now would probably be a good time. And then two, you need to make sure you allow enough time for public comment at this meeting.
so you said White Cloud has a population of 1,300 and some?
Yeah, just under 1,400 people, 1,383 people. We had three dispensaries, a $1.2 million dispensary being built as I was leaving there, and 3 grow facilities with 7 more to be built. So our tax base up there has grown tremendously. And I can tell you, they are the companies that, are volunteering at our community and police picnics, and they can't advertise where they're at, but they do come and they donate to the community. They donate for the Christmas program and different things. So they're really involved in the community as well. They're very, very good business people. And you wouldn't know if you saw them that their business was growing marijuana or selling marijuana. You just wouldn't know it.
So, yeah, do we have any questions for Attorney Piercy before we let him off the hook? Well, thank you so much for being with us this evening. We appreciate your time and information that you gave us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Been a living.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks. Bye.
Just wanted to echo kind of what Assistant City Manager Rich said. As we move forward with this discussion, I encourage all of council, please do your research, reach out to other surrounding communities. And when we go to take action on this, whatever it may be, we need to keep in mind what we are voting on will have long-term effect on the community. Instead of focusing on the heat of the moment, how you're feeling right now, we need to make sure we are thinking about community as long-term. So just.
Great. So do we have anybody on for public comment? Okay.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Again, for yours.
Okay. Garrett Brown, 1016 South Superior Street. So a couple of things. I want to say on the onset that I do support adult use marijuana, right? So I do support recreational use. I feel like the voters in the city overwhelmingly supported it. That doesn't mean that they approved it locally, but it is legal in the state, and the vast majority of residents in Albion supported its legalization. So that's kind of, as a citizen, that's where I'm coming from. But what I do want to say, because I'm always about like governance and the council's right to make decisions, because you are our political representatives. I just want to push back gently, lightly on kind of what Councilmember Williamson was saying. So just because the Planning Commission is making a recommendation, that doesn't mean you have to vote on it, right? So you all are, at the end of the day, the elected voice for the city. So if you have talked to your residents or you've done your research and you feel in good conscience that you can't support it, I don't think any of you should be made to feel like you're being pressured by a colleague to take action on something. And again, I say this as someone who not only supports it, but as someone, I've actually been in to my job, I've actually been on site in Grand Rapids at a grow facility where they're growing medical and adult use, which is a recreational use marijuana. And I've seen an actual, up and running, highly sophisticated operation. So it can be done safely. It really can. So I'm not fighting against the idea of it. I just feel like council, I feel it's kind of manipulative to say like, oh, people have been working really hard on planning commission for this. And if it gets to the council, we're going to gum up the works. But really at the end of the day, the council is there to ask questions and to do what they feel is best, because that's why we have elections. So the public can have their say about your leadership, right? So don't feel pressured, but I do agree that you should do your research. And then I want to thank Councilmember Williams for bringing up the program for people who, because Albion is included in that equity program, but it also includes people who have former convictions. I want to say they approved that, former convictions for possession of marijuana. So I think that there's an opportunity even to target people in our communities who might have those, previous records. So thank you, and I just wanted to say that to you tonight.
Thank you.
21.
Hi, this is Evergreen Showers, 805 Valhalla Drive. Can you hear me?
Sure can, floor is yours.
Okay, I'm against the recreational marijuana. I am against it. And I'll keep saying that, and every time y'all bring it up, I'm against it. I look at our community, I look at the people in the community, and then I looked at your faces when the man said, what, 50,000 or 28,000 that you can make a year. You're gonna sell us out for $28,000, our community, our people. I looked at the lady who was doing the Olympics, and she smoked a joint and she couldn't compete. You know, so what do you think about this level in our town? You know, getting jobs and keeping jobs, and people driving under the influence of marijuana. I'm glad you could smell it, because you really wouldn't know who's smoking it unless you smell that skunk on them. You know, and it's not good. It's not good. I'm thinking about our future children. I'm thinking about our future town and what we represent and what we are trying to present in this town. And when you, and I know that y'all are the head of the town of Albion, you know, and you make these decisions, these choices for us. I don't care who voted for it. You got to think with the long picture. How is this going to affect our community, our people, our children? You know, we already dealing with some stuff. We already dealing with issues where people want to be more than what they are, you know, controlling issues in the town and these here problems that we have. Then you're going to pile it on with some marijuana. I just don't see it. I really don't. And I pray against it every day. I pray against it, just like this corona stuff, you know, but I'm asking y'all to think clearly and be wise in making your decision to bring this in our town, to just let it just freely go, just freely do and freely smoke. I'm strongly against it, you know, so I pray for y'all wisdom. I pray that y'all would consider not bringing this into our town, you know, so every time y'all bring it up, I'm going to fight against it. And I just don't approve of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
21.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me?
Sure can.
My name is Nick Angerman. I wanted to vocalize that I was in support of this measure. While I appreciate the comments of the lady who spoke before me, I found that a lot of these remarks were anecdotal evidence, and I don't think we're very indicative of what we are talking about this evening. I understand the concerns about substance use in the community, but I would point out that outside of one reference to the Olympics, none of these could be said about marijuana that couldn't also be said about alcohol. And last time I checked, this is not a dry city in that regard. Likewise, I think it's been pretty clear that the people voted on a 2-to-1 ratio in favor of that. I don't want to undermine the voices of the people who did vote against it, but I think it is clear that the vast majority of people would like to see this in the community. That being said, I would also like to point out that there is access to this product in nearby towns that offer delivery. So it would not be as if this isn't accessible by the general public readily at the moment. The only difference would be that it would be pumping the money into the community. And again, while I can understand why people personally disagree with it, and that is their right and their opinion, I think if we look at this holistically, it seems to be in favor of Albion at the moment.
Thank you.
One more.
Hi, this is Rook Malik. Can you guys hear me?
Sure can, floor is yours.
Okay, great. I'm the manager of Sunny's, which is the current medical marijuana dispensary that is in town. And I would like the community and the board to know that a provisioning center cannot be sustainable on just medical marijuana at this location. Medical marijuana is about 3 to 5% of the market share at the time. The rest is recreational. In Parma, Kinship, which is one of our competitors, got rid of medical marijuana completely. They only sell recreational. The state is losing a lot of medical patients. And I also wanted everyone to know that if it is recreational, we ID everyone, and you must be 21 and up. We work with the substance abuse prevention services in town, and they're on board for this as well. If someone in the community wants marijuana, they are going to get it, whether they turn to the streets and buy untested, unregulated marijuana, or they can simply go to a delivery service and have it delivered from anybody in the state. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. City manager's report. Council member comments. Motion to adjourn. City Clerk Domingo.
Councilmember Williams,
Yes.
Reed,
Yes.
Jackson,
Yes.
Lawler,
Yes.
Lanu,
Yes.
Williamson,
Yes.
and Mayor Snyder.
Yes. City meeting adjourned 6:59 p.m.